Mr. President, we come, Senator Blumenthal and I, to the floor today to thank our colleagues for adopting by unanimous consent last night Senate Resolution 621, which is exactly mirrored in the words of House Resolution 833, condemning the attacks that occurred in Newtown, Connecticut last Friday and expressing sorrow to all those affected by those attacks. We're still in shock in Connecticut. All of us who know this little town, as America has come to know it, 28,000 people, beautiful town, hardworking people who work their way to get there, tight families, very religious, very much involved in the life of the community, peaceful, and out of nowhere, and this tragically is the point in the warning, comes this one deranged individual with guns and slaughters 26 innocents, breaking our hearts, with 20 of those being young children. I'm sure everybody now feels as if they are part of the family of those who were killed. You look at the faces of those children, pure, innocent, and I think of the words of one of the clergymen at the interfaith service the other night. These are angels, and they are really with the angels in heaven now. The work, the response of the first responders, and the trauma that they have gone through to face what they had to face, and the carnage that they witnessed there. And yet you talk to some of them and they're guilty that they didn't get there earlier and couldn't have stopped it somehow. Of course, they did more than we could ask of anybody. They ran to the danger. The principal, the teachers, I mean, the stories that come out about the heroism. I remember long ago somebody I heard speak said the definition of courage is grace under pressure. Pressure is not really even the word here. It's grace in a moment of terror. The single-mindedness and grace of the principal, the teachers who acted in a way that put their own lives on the line to protect the lives of the children. And let us speak the truth, there were hundreds more children in that building that could have been targets of this madman. So we are wounded, but I will tell you that, and America is wounded, the world is wounded. One of the priests said to me the other night at the service that he was so touched that he had received a bundle of letters from school children in Russia. And it reminded me that there was an incident in Russia years ago where a gunman went into a schoolhouse and wantonly killed children, and Monsignor was so touched by it. But that's the way this event has touched the world. I will tell you that this is a strong town, and you can feel the people of this community pulling together to support the survivors and thinking about how they can rebuild the town and its spirit. The first select woman said so poignantly the other night at the interfaith service that we will not allow this event to define Newtown, Connecticut, and they will not. But the families of those who have been lost have been changed forever. And it's in that regard that I particularly want to thank my colleagues for this resolution of condolence and support. I want to thank my colleague, Senator Reid, for the moment of silence yesterday in this chamber. In my faith tradition, when you visit a house of mourning, one of the customs is for the visitor to sit silently with the mourners. And it's very awkward. It's actually not the natural thing we want to do, but this tradition has come about because, one, as an act of respect to the mourners, because they may be in their own mourning internally, but the other really, and we want to allow them to speak first if they want to speak, but the other really is that in the face of death, and particularly in the senseless, brutal deaths of these 26 in Newtown, sometimes the best response is silence and all that the silence contains. So I thank my colleague, Senator Reid, for that moment of silence. Senator Blumenthal and I and our Connecticut congressional delegation convened a vigil last night at which we all spoke, and Father Conroy, the chaplain of the House, offered prayer. Chaplain Black could not be there because he was at Senator Inouye's bedside with his family. We thank all of you who came last night. Your presence meant a lot to us, meant a lot to the people back home in Newtown. And now the question is, Mr. President, can we do anything to stop this from happening again, even once, but hopefully more often? Can we? What can we do? And I understand that, as the president said, incidentally, the president's visit to Newtown was so comforting to the families and all of the town and all of the people of Connecticut. He brought comfort, and I will say he brought resolve, which was very moving and inspiring to everyone there. And as he said, these situations are always complicated. And we can always say, as we look at all the possible causes of such a tragedy, that, well, even if we did something about that, even if we banned all guns, there'd still be violence. Or even if we provided better mental health treatment, there'd still be people who would break through and commit acts of violence. And even if we removed all the stimuli to violence in our entertainment culture, still people would commit these acts. Of course that's true. But do we not have the capacity to intervene at the different points in the story of this young man to stop this from happening at least once again and probably many more times? Of course we have that capacity. I keep being taken back as people say that human nature is violent. Of course there's violence that goes back to the beginning of recorded history. We remember that the two children of Adam and Eve, Cain killed Abel in a terribly violent act. But I think we also have to be instructed by what happened after that, when God speaks to Cain and says, "Where is your brother?" And Cain feigns ignorance and asks the question that echoes through the millennia since then, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And God says to Cain in Genesis, "What have you done?" You can hear in our mind's ears the voice of God in anger. "What have you done? You've killed your brother. You've killed my creation." And then God says, "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." And I think in that the Bible instructs us, the words of God instruct us, that we are our brother's keepers. We are our sister's keepers. And of course, we are most of all our children's keepers. And that we can never say, "Oh, people are just violent," and turn away. We have the capacity, particularly we here, honored, privileged to serve in the Senate, serve in the House, serve in the White House, to do something about this. Somebody said to me, as the president said the other night, if we save just one child's life by what we do, it will have been worth it. We can save a lot more than one child if we work together on this. I've talked to people since Friday who've said to me, "Why will this be any different? Nothing happened after Columbine or Aurora or Virginia Tech or any of the other acts of mass violence in our society." I don't blame people for being skeptical. That's the truth. We should have acted earlier, and we haven't. I went back, I proposed with Senator McCain, Senator Byrd, Senator Jack Reed, a bunch of others, the creation of a national commission on violence 3 weeks after Columbine in 1999. And it passed the Senate, but it didn't make it through the House and Conference Committee. So I understand why people are skeptical, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't hear the cries of those children as the guns of that madman turned on them, and actually see their blood on the ground of that floor of that schoolhouse until we get something done. We can prevent this from happening to people again. We can certainly prevent it from happening to some people. I see signs of hope around us. People, colleagues who have been protectors of gun rights, saying in the last few days, this has got to change. We've got to come together and reason together and act together, and everything has to be on the table, including our gun laws. There was a poll in the Washington Post today. It was very striking to note that for the first time, when people have been asked this question and they've been asked it after a series of acts of mass violence, Columbine, Virginia Tech, etc., Aurora, do you think this was an isolated act, or does it say something about more troubling conditions in our society? I'm paraphrasing. For the first time, every other time people said it was an isolated act of a madman or mad people. This time they said it reflects a deeper problem in our society. And I believe what causes that change is that 20 of the victims in Newtown, Connecticut were young children. And there is not only a heartbreak across our country about this, not only anger, but I think there's guilt, and we all ought to feel guilty, because as a society, what the attacks in Newtown said to us is that we have failed to fulfill what would seem to be our most natural law, if you will, responsibility, which is to protect the safety and lives of our children. So I hope we will act. There would be no better tribute, no better source of consolation to the families that have lost loved ones. I've proposed a commission, as I did in 1999, because these are complicated questions. I mean, in almost every one of these acts of mass violence, you have a young man troubled, clearly, in hindsight, family, friends, schoolmates say something was wrong with him. Very often, I've heard rumors about this being the case with Adam Lanza in Newtown. I don't know for sure, so I'm not saying it as any more than a rumor. Very often, these young men have had an almost hypnotic involvement in some form of violence in our entertainment culture, particularly violent video games. And then they obtain guns, and they go out and become not just troubled young men, but mass murderers. To try to intervene, particularly at the beginning with the troubled young man, and get him, or if it's a woman, her, help quickly, to make sure that our mental health system is there to protect and offer that help, and perhaps that our insurance system, health insurance, is there to guarantee that payment will be made for that. Complicated. The impact of the entertainment culture, complicated as well. Obviously, not every young person who plays a violent video game becomes a killer. I know, because I've spent a lot of time looking at the social science on this, and it goes back decades, that there's a very clear pattern here where young people who are involved in violence in the entertainment culture are more aggressive. Thank God, of course, almost none of them become murderers, but some of them do, and we've got to ask why. And then, of course, we need to strengthen our gun laws. I hope that either by executive action or legislative action we'll convene such a commission. But, Mr. President, I want to make very clear, I am not offering this idea as a substitute for any action that we can take now, any action that the president can take now, for instance, with regard to the existing laws that are aimed at preventing people who shouldn't have guns from having them, keeping guns that really are military and are not part of hunting or sports shooting off the market. Anything the president could do, anything Congress could do. Now, I'd support a restoration of the assault ban today. These are weapons developed by our military originally, not by private industry for hunting or sport shooting purposes. They shouldn't be sold. We've got the background checks in the Brady bill. If you attempt to buy a gun from a licensed federal firearms dealer, why shouldn't that exist for people who buy a gun at a gun show? Where incidentally terrorists we know have bought guns. So anything we can do quickly, we ought to do. But I also think that a commission will make sure that we won't let the anger, the hurt, the guilt that we feel now dissipate with time or as a result of legislative gridlock. Yes, legislative gridlock again. Remember Lincoln's words that at Gettysburg, that these dead shall not have died in vain. I think that should be our animating emotion and sense of purpose here, as reflected and I think led by the president's very powerful words in Newtown on Sunday night. I remember after the terrorist attacks of 9/11, all of the work that we did here in Washington to create the Department of Homeland Security, the 9/11 Commission, the legislation, to pass the legislation implementing the 9/11 Commission. A lot of work, bipartisan work, was done here in Congress and in the administrative branch, executive branch, to make those laws and to keep us a lot safer, to prevent another 9/11 from happening. But I will tell you this, Mr. President, in my belief, and I was at the center of all this, those laws would not have been passed and enacted, and we wouldn't be safer today if it were not for the extraordinary commitment of the families of people who were killed on 9/11 to get involved. They talked truth to power, and when members of Congress and members of the executive branch were reluctant to act and were falling back in old political ways, self-defensive ways, those families faced them face to face, and they turned, some in power turned their faces away because they couldn't take it, but ultimately those families brought about action. These families in Newtown who've lost people, loved ones, children, will never be the same. I hope and pray that they can come back to some semblance of normalcy. I hope that some of them will have the courage and the strength, which really will take an enormous amount, to get involved in forcing our country to do whatever it can to stop anything like this from happening again. But in a larger sense, we're all members of the family. This is the American family. Those 26 people, those 20 children were our children, our family members. And it's incumbent on us now to summon not just the remorse and the guilt, but the will to act to stop this from happening again and to save the lives of our family members. I thank the chair, and I yield the